My husband handed me flowers on my b-day in front of all my friends. Surprise, I'm taking a trip. With my mistress. My 3 sons added, we booked their tickets so you're not associated w/such a loser mom. Everyone laughed and cheered. I calmly smiled and left. The next day, I erased their names from my will and froze their bank accounts. I got desperate texts, sorry, mommy, it was just a prank. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. My name is Lorraine, and this is the story of how my life, as I knew it, burned to the ground on my 50th birthday, and how I rose from the ashes. The scent of night-blooming jasmine has always been my favorite. It's supposed to be calming, a sweet perfume that hangs in the cool evening air. But tonight, sitting here on my porch swing, it just smells like poison. It's cloying, suffocating. Every gentle sway of the swing feels like a shove, and the rhythmic creak of the chains is like a clock ticking off the seconds of my new, shattered reality. It's been 5 hours. 5 hours since I walked out of my own 50th birthday party, leaving behind the smiling faces of my friends, the half-eaten cake, and the smoking crater where my family used to be. My hands are still trembling. I'm clutching a lukewarm mug of chamomile, but it might as well be gasoline for all the good it's doing. I keep seeing it, replaying the moment in my head like a car crash I can't look away from. My husband, Arthur, standing there with that charming smile he reserves for public appearances. My 3 sons, Garrett, Spencer, and Dean, standing beside him, looking so proud. And all those faces, people I've known for 20, 30 years, all turned towards me, their expressions shifting from happy anticipation to something else. Shock. Pity. And in a few corners, a flicker of cruel amusement. This was supposed to be my night. A celebration of half a century. 50 years of trying to be a good person, a good wife, a good mother. I'd spent weeks looking forward to it. I bought a new dress, a lovely sapphire blue silk that made me feel, well, it made me feel pretty, for the first time in a long time. I imagined toasts and laughter and maybe a slow dance with Arthur, a moment to feel like we were still the young couple who promised each other forever. What a fool I was. What a blind, sentimental fool. They called it a special presentation. A tribute. And I, like an idiot, smiled and felt a warmth spread through my chest. I thought it would be a slideshow of old photos, the boys on their first day of school, family vacations to the lake, clumsy Christmas portraits where someone was always blinking. I thought it would be sweet, maybe a little embarrassing, but full of love. Instead, they stood me in the center of the room and executed me. Publicly. They took a lifetime of my love, my sacrifice, my devotion, and they threw it back in my face like garbage. So now I sit here, in the dark, with the scent of jasmine choking me. The party is over. The guests have gone home, whispering and gossiping about the spectacular implosion of the Miller family. And I am left with the ringing silence and a single, burning question that echoes in the wreckage: how did I not see this coming? How could I have been so blind? The house behind me is dark. It's no longer a home. It's just a building filled with ghosts and lies. And me. I'm still here. And I'm starting to realize that the heartbreak churning in my gut is slowly, surely, crystallizing into something else. Something hard, and cold, and sharp enough to cut. You know, when you're young and in love, you believe in fairy tales. My fairy tale started 25 years ago with Arthur. He was brilliant, ambitious, with a fire in his eyes that promised a life less ordinary. I was just a girl with a significant inheritance from my parents, who had passed away far too young. I wasn't looking for someone to take care of me, I was looking for a partner, someone to build a life with. Arthur sold me that dream, and I bought it wholesale. He had a business idea, a tech startup that was, he claimed, going to change the world. All it needed was capital. My capital. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated a huge portion of my trust fund, the money my father had worked his entire life to secure for me, and handed it over. It's for us, I told myself. It's for our future. And for a while, it felt like it was. The business took off, not like a rocket, but it was successful enough. We bought this house, in this lovely neighborhood. We had Garrett, our serious, handsome firstborn. Then came Spencer, the charming, easygoing middle child. And finally, Dean, our sweet, quiet baby. My life became them. I put my own career aspirations on hold to be a full-time mother. I managed the house, the school runs, the doctor's appointments. I hosted the holiday dinners and planned the birthday parties. And I continued to be the family's silent financial partner. When Arthur's business hit a rough patch, it was my money that bailed it out. When he wanted to expand, it was my signature on the loan documents, backed by my assets. When Garrett wanted a brand new Mustang for his 16th birthday, Arthur would say, "Let's see what we can do," but it was my account the money came from. When Spencer got into some trouble with credit card debt in college, I was the one who quietly paid it off to keep it from affecting his future. And when Dean needed tutors for his SATs and a substantial college fund, it was my inheritance that made it possible. I never threw it in their faces. I never kept a tally. It was just what you did for family. I thought we were a team. Arthur was the face of the family's success, the brilliant entrepreneur. I was the foundation, the quiet strength that held everything up. He got the accolades, I got the satisfaction of seeing my family thrive. Or so I told myself. Looking back now, the signs were all there, weren't they? Little red flags I chose to ignore. The way Arthur would dismiss my opinions on business matters with a pat on the hand, saying, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." The way the boys, as they got older, started coming to me for money but going to their father for advice, as if I were just the bank teller and he were the bank president. They'd ask me for a few $100s for a weekend trip, and I'd transfer it. Then I'd overhear them on the phone with Arthur, laughing about some grand plan, some adventure that I was funding but was never a part of. There was a subtle shift in the household dynamic. It became Arthur and the boys against the world, I guess. And I was just the support staff. The provider of comfort and cash. I convinced myself it was a natural part of sons growing up and bonding with their father. I told myself I shouldn't be jealous. But a part of me felt erased. I was the architect of this beautiful life, yet I was becoming invisible within its walls. I furnished the gilded cage, polished the bars, and never once realized I was locking myself inside. Let me walk you through the party. I want you to see it exactly as I did. The event was held at a beautiful old country club, one we'd been members of for years. The main ballroom has these stunning floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the golf course, and we'd timed it so the sun would be setting right as the party got into full swing. It was perfect. Or it was supposed to be. I spent the first hour greeting everyone. Old friends from college, neighbors we'd known since the boys were in diapers, Arthur's business associates. Everyone was so kind. "Lorraine, you look stunning. 50 looks good on you." I was floating, genuinely happy. Arthur was by my side, one hand resting on the small of my back, playing the part of the proud, adoring husband. He handed me a glass of champagne and whispered, "To the most beautiful woman in the room." I actually blushed. I believed him. After about an hour and a half, just as dessert was being served, Arthur tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted down. My boys, Garrett, Spencer, and Dean, came to stand beside him at the front of the room, near a large projector screen I hadn't paid much attention to. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his voice smooth as silk. 50 years. It's an incredible milestone, and no one deserves to be celebrated more than my wonderful wife, Lorraine. He smiled at me, and I smiled back, my heart feeling so full it might burst. The boys and I wanted to do something a little different this year. Not just a gift, but a tribute. A look back at the woman who made all of our lives possible. My eyes started to well up. This was it. This was the moment of validation, of love, that I'd been subconsciously craving for years. The lights dimmed, and the projector flickered to life. The first few photos were exactly what I'd expected. A picture of me and Arthur on our wedding day. A photo of me holding a newborn Garrett, looking exhausted but blissful. A funny picture of the five of us on a ski trip, covered in snow. People were chuckling, murmuring awe. Then, the tone shifted. The music changed from a soft piano melody to something jarring. A photo of me appeared on screen, a candid shot I'd never seen before. I was in the kitchen, looking stressed, flour on my cheek. Arthur's voice came over the speakers, a pre-recorded narration. "Lorraine has always been practical," he said, and there was an edge to the word. "She managed the household with an iron fist." The next slide was a spreadsheet. My household budget spreadsheet. On a giant screen for all my friends to see. Every penny accounted for, Arthur's voice continued. "Sometimes, a man needs room to breathe, to dream. But dreams don't fit neatly into a budget." My smile faltered. My stomach did a slow, sick flip. This wasn't a tribute. What was this? The slideshow continued. A picture of me looking tired in my gardening clothes was captioned, "While I was building an empire, Lorraine was content in her own little world." It was followed by a photo of Arthur on a yacht with some business partners, laughing. The implication was clear. He was the ambitious one. I was the boring homebody holding him back. My cheeks were burning. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. The air grew thick and uncomfortable. I looked at my sons, pleading with my eyes for them to stop this, but they just stood there, stoic. Garrett, my firstborn, had a look of grim justification on his face. Spencer, my charmer, wouldn't meet my gaze. And Dean, my baby, just stared at his shoes. The final blow came when a photo of a stunningly beautiful woman, someone half my age, appeared on the screen. She was laughing, standing next to Arthur on a sunny balcony somewhere tropical. Sometimes in life, Arthur's voice said, now filled with a mock sadness, two people just grow apart. One person is ready to embrace the next chapter, to live life to the fullest, while the other is content to just manage the decline. He then walked back to the microphone in real time. He looked directly at me, his eyes cold. "Lorraine, I wanted to do this in front of everyone so there would be no misunderstandings. I'm in love with someone else. I'm leaving you." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. And then he said the words that would echo in my mind forever. "And I want to thank my sons for their support. They helped me realize I deserve to be happy." If Arthur's announcement was a knife to the heart, what came next was the twisting of the blade by my own children. After he dropped that bombshell, a wave of gasps and whispers rippled through the room. I was frozen, my champagne glass still in my hand, unable to process what was happening. It felt like a nightmare, a surreal play where I was the unwilling star. Then Garrett, my eldest, the one I'd taught to read, the one whose nightmares I'd soothed, stepped up to the microphone. He cleared his throat, looking not at me, but at the stunned audience. "We know this is a shock to everyone," he said, his voice steady. "But we've seen how unhappy our father has been for years. Mom, she's a good woman, but she's a lot. She's controlling. We just want our dad to have a chance at real happiness." Controlling? Was he talking about the time I insisted he finish his college applications instead of blowing his tuition money on a trip to Cancun? Was he talking about me making sure he had a budget when he moved into his first apartment, an apartment I paid the security deposit for? My mind was reeling. Next was Spencer. My charming, sociable Spencer, who could always make me laugh. He looked deeply uncomfortable, but he took the mic anyway. "It's true," he mumbled, shuffling his feet. "Dad deserves this. We've been helping him. Keeping his secret. We knew he was seeing someone else. We've even met her. She's great." He actually said that. He stood in front of me, in front of all our friends and family, and praised my husband's mistress. He talked about how she was fun and easygoing, and the unspoken contrast hung in the air like a guillotine. I was the difficult one. The ball and chain. I felt the blood drain from my face. They knew. This wasn't a recent development. This was a long, calculated deception. They had watched me plan this party, watched me pick out my dress, watched me bubble with excitement, all the while knowing they were about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my life. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. Dean, my youngest, never spoke. He just stood behind his brothers, a silent accomplice. But his silence was just as loud, just as damning. He was my baby, the one I was closest to, or so I thought. His refusal to look at me, his silent consent to this public execution, was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. Arthur put his arm around Spencer and Garrett, a picture of father-son solidarity. They even helped book our tickets for a trip to celebrate my new freedom, he announced with a triumphant grin. So I can't be associated with their mother's negativity anymore. That's when it happened. A few people in the crowd, mostly Arthur's younger business cronies, started to clap. A slow, hesitant clap that grew into scattered applause. Someone cheered. I saw a few people raise their glasses. They were toasting my demise. My humiliation was now a spectator sport. And my sons, my boys, were the architects of it. They had handed their father the matches and the gasoline, and stood back to watch me burn. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The soft, loving mother that had existed for 25 years ceased to be. And in her place, something cold and hard began to form. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember taking off that sapphire blue dress or washing the makeup off my face. The next week is a blur of gray, a thick fog of shock and grief. I didn't answer the phone, which rang incessantly for the first 2 days and then fell silent. I didn't check the dozens of texts that pinged, a meaningless chorus of fake concern. I just existed. My house, once a source of pride, felt like a mausoleum. Every framed photo on the wall was a lie. There we were, smiling on a beach in Hawaii, a trip I'd paid for. There was Garrett's graduation photo, his cap and gown bought with my money. Spencer's football trophy gleamed on the mantelpiece. I remembered every single Saturday I'd spent on cold bleachers cheering for him. It was all a sham. A carefully constructed illusion of a happy family that I had funded and they had desecrated. For 3 days, I did nothing but drift from room to room. I tried to make coffee one morning and just stood there, watching it overflow and run onto the counter, a dark, bitter puddle. I sat in front of the TV for hours, the screen flashing with images and sounds that never penetrated the fog in my head. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I was a ghost in my own life. Then, on the 4th day, something shifted. I was sitting at the dining room table, staring at a dust bunny in the corner, when the mail slot clattered. I didn't move for an hour. But eventually, a flicker of something, not curiosity, but maybe just a vestige of old habit, made me get up. I walked to the front door and picked up the small pile of envelopes from the floor. Bills, junk mail, and a crisp, white envelope from my financial advisor. It was my quarterly portfolio statement. I sat back down at the table and opened it. I stared at the numbers. The stocks, the bonds, the mutual funds. The assets listed under my name. The value of the properties tied to my inheritance. It was a substantial amount. It was the foundation upon which this entire family had been built. And it was all mine. A thought, cold and clear as ice, cut through the fog. They thought they had all the power. Arthur, with his mistress and his public declarations. My sons, with their smug pronouncements and their betrayal. They thought they had won. They thought they could humiliate me, discard me, and walk away with the life I had provided. They had forgotten one crucial detail. They had forgotten who held the purse strings. It wasn't a loud, angry epiphany. It was a quiet, deadly certainty that settled deep in my bones. The tears stopped. The fog lifted. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was now surrounded by a wall of ice. I stood up, walked to my office, and pulled out every financial document I could find. Bank statements, loan agreements, property deeds, my parents' will and trust documents. I spread them all out on the dining room table, covering the polished wood with the architecture of my revenge. I didn't need their love anymore. I didn't need their respect. What I needed was a good lawyer. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, not with friends, but with the best divorce attorney and the most ruthless financial litigator I could find. I was no longer a grieving wife and a heartbroken mother. I was a client. A CEO. And I was about to conduct the most hostile takeover of my own life. The planning had begun. To execute my plan, I needed them to believe I was broken. I needed them to underestimate me one last time. So, after a week of total silence, I picked up the phone and called Arthur. I let my voice tremble. I pitched it just high enough to sound fragile, on the verge of tears. "Arthur?" I whispered. There was a moment of surprise on his end. "Lorraine." I was beginning to worry. Worry? The audacity was breathtaking. I don't understand, I said, injecting a pathetic little sob. "I think we need to talk. About the logistics. The divorce." I could almost hear the smug smile in his voice. "Of course, darling. I'm glad you're being sensible about this. There's no need for things to get ugly." "No," I agreed softly. "Not ugly. I want to make sure the boys are taken care of. That's all that matters to me." That was the bait. The idea that my primary concern was still their well-being. He swallowed it whole. We agreed to meet for dinner in 2 days, along with the boys, at a quiet restaurant. He suggested it, thinking it was his idea. A final family meeting to sort out the terms of my surrender. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Not emotionally, but strategically. I met with my lawyer, and we drafted a series of documents. They looked like standard asset transfer forms, full of dense legal jargon. One was a document that would move Arthur's name off our shared business accounts, under the guise of simplifying the divorce proceedings. Another was a form giving me sole power of attorney over the trust that funded the boys' allowances and expenses. To any casual observer, they were just boring paperwork. But in the hands of my lawyer, they were weapons. When I arrived at the restaurant, I made sure I looked the part. I wore a shapeless gray cardigan, no makeup, and I let my hair look flat and lifeless. I slumped in my chair and avoided eye contact. They were all there already, looking confident and relaxed. Arthur was wearing a new, expensive-looking watch. Garrett was scrolling through his phone, looking bored. Spencer gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile. Dean just stared at the bread basket. "Mom, you look tired," Garrett said, not unkindly, but with a clinical detachment that chilled me. "It's been a difficult week," I murmured. The dinner was excruciating. They talked around the issue, making small talk about their work, a new car Spencer was thinking of buying, Dean's plans for the summer. They were acting as if this was all perfectly normal, as if they hadn't just publicly vivisected me a week earlier. I played along, pushing food around my plate, offering weak smiles, and saying very little. I was the ghost at their feast. Finally, over coffee, Arthur cleared his throat. "Lorraine, about the arrangements. My lawyer will be in touch with yours, but I want this to be amicable. For the boys' sake." I nodded, looking down at my hands. "Of course. All I care about is them. Which is why my lawyer drew these up." I pushed a slim manila folder across the table. He said it would be simpler if we untangled some of our shared finances now. It just gives me sole authority over my own inheritance and trust accounts. It makes it cleaner, so I can ensure the boys' funds are always protected and managed by me directly. It's the only thing I have left to give them. My voice cracked at the end, a masterful touch, if I do say so myself. Arthur, the picture of magnanimity, barely glanced at the papers. He saw my performance of the broken woman, the devoted mother, and his ego did the rest. Of course, Lorraine. Whatever you think is best, he said, pulling out a pen. He signed each page with a flourish. Then he pushed the folder towards the boys. You all need to sign as well, as beneficiaries of the trust, just acknowledging the change in management. Garrett signed without even reading it. Spencer followed suit. Dean hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering towards me, but after a sharp look from Arthur, he quickly scribbled his name. They handed the folder back to me. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of their arrogance and my victory. I had it. I had everything I needed. I paid for the dinner, a final, ironic gesture, and walked out of that restaurant. The performance was over. The war was about to begin. The morning after that dinner, I woke up before the sun. There was no grief, no fog. There was only a cold, clear purpose. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. It was time to pull the plug. My first call was to the private bank that managed our primary accounts. I spoke to our longtime manager, a man named Mr. Harris. Good morning, Lorraine, he said, his voice warm. What can I do for you today? Good morning, David, I said, my voice crisp and professional. I have a series of directives. I've just emailed you the legal documents signed by Arthur and my sons last night, along with a letter from my attorney. First, I need you to freeze all shared accounts immediately. Second, I'm revoking all supplementary credit cards linked to my primary accounts. The ones under the names Garrett Miller, Spencer Miller, and Dean Miller. Revoke them. Effective immediately. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Lorraine, is everything all right? This is highly unusual. Everything is perfectly fine, David. I'm simply restructuring my finances. The documents are all in order. Please confirm when the directives have been executed. He stammered for a moment, then said he would get right on it. One by one, I made the calls. The trust fund manager. The credit card companies. The bank that held the loan for Garrett's Mustang, a loan for which I was the cosigner. I informed them I would no longer be responsible for the payments. Let him figure it out. By 9 a.m., the financial life support system that had sustained my husband and sons for their entire lives had been switched off. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It was like pruning a dead tree. A painful, but necessary, cut. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Garrett. Mom, my card just got declined at the gas station. Is something wrong with the account? I looked at the text, and I didn't respond. I simply deleted it. An hour later, another text. Seriously, Mom, what's going on? I tried calling the bank and they said the card was cancelled. Call me. Silence. Then came Spencer, always more dramatic. He didn't text, he called. I let it go to voicemail. The message was frantic. Mom! What the hell is going on? I tried to pay for lunch and was completely humiliated. My cards are all declined. I checked my bank account, the one you put my allowance in, and it's empty. There's nothing there. This has to be some kind of mistake. Call me back right now. The panic in his voice was a symphony to my ears. Later that afternoon, an email from Dean's University bursar's office popped into my inbox. It was a courtesy copy of a notice sent to him. Payment for the upcoming semester is past due. Please remit payment immediately to avoid suspension of your student privileges. I read the email, took a slow sip of my tea, and moved it to the trash folder. The storm had made landfall. They were so used to living in a world cushioned by my money that they had no idea how to function without it. They thought they had discarded me, but they were about to find out that they had only discarded their own safety net. I went into my garden and spent the afternoon peacefully pulling weeds, feeling the sun on my back for the first time in what felt like an eternity. For every weed I pulled from the earth, I felt like I was pulling another piece of their poison out of my life. The days that followed were a cascade of chaos, and I had a front row seat. My phone became a repository of their escalating panic. After their initial confusion turned to anger, their messages became a toxic cocktail of threats, accusations, and, most pathetically, bewildered pleading. Garrett, my pragmatic, serious son, was the first to truly unravel. He had built his entire identity around being successful and in control, an image propped up by a luxury apartment he couldn't afford and a car he wasn't paying for. I received a frantic voicemail from him 3 days after I'd cut him off. "Mom," the bank called. "They're going to repossess the Mustang." "The Mustang? My name is on that loan too. This is going to destroy my credit." "What are you doing? Are you trying to ruin my life? After everything Dad and I have done to try and secure our futures, you pull this? You are being incredibly selfish." I listened to the message, and all I could think was, my signature is on that loan as the guarantor, son. Your credit is the least of my worries. I knew that, legally, the bank would come after me, which is why my lawyer had already prepared a settlement to pay off the car entirely, take possession of it, and have the title transferred to my name. I'd always liked that car. Spencer's downfall was less about assets and more about lifestyle. He was a social butterfly, constantly out with friends at expensive bars and restaurants, always picking up the tab to look generous. His desperation was palpable in a string of increasingly unhinged texts. "They're going to evict me, Mom. The rent is due. How am I supposed to pay it? I had to borrow money from a friend. Do you know how humiliating that is? You're doing this out of spite. Dad was right about you. You're a bitter, vengeful woman." And then there was Arthur. Oh, Arthur. He tried to maintain his cool facade for about 48 hours. He must have assumed it was a temporary glitch, a fit of pique from his hysterical wife. He was in for a rude awakening. He was in the middle of closing a business deal that required him to put up a significant amount of capital he assumed he could pull from our shared investment accounts. I heard about what happened from a mutual acquaintance who was in the meeting. Apparently, Arthur had assured his new partners the funds were secured. When he tried to make the transfer and was met with a wall of red flags and frozen accounts, he turned pale. He made a flustered excuse and spent 20 minutes in the hallway, presumably on the phone with the bank, getting the worst news of his life. The deal, of course, fell through. He lost a massive opportunity and, more importantly, he lost face. His text to me was a single, furious line. "What have you done?" I responded with a single word. "Justice." The final, and perhaps most satisfying, piece of news came via an email. It was from the Homeowners Association of our neighborhood. Arthur, in his arrogance, had tried to have me removed from the property deed, claiming I had willingly vacated the premises. The email was a notification that his request had been denied, as the property was purchased primarily with funds from a private trust established in my name long before our marriage. The house wasn't ours. It was, and had always been, legally and unequivocally, mine. My lawyer had already drafted the eviction notice. He had 30 days to vacate my property. The king, who had so proudly announced his new freedom, was about to become homeless. His kingdom was crumbling, and he was beginning to realize he was just a jester in a court he never truly owned. A week after the financial blackout, they showed up. All 4 of them. I was in the kitchen, listening to an old jazz record and trying a new recipe for lemon ricotta pasta when the doorbell rang. Not a polite, friendly ring, but a long, insistent lean. I knew who it was. I wiped my hands on my apron, turned down the music, and took a deep, steadying breath. When I opened the door, they were standing on my porch like a delegation of the damned. Arthur was in the front, his face a thunderous mask of rage. Behind him stood my sons, a motley crew of desperation. Garrett looked haggard, Spencer was pale and fidgeting, and Dean just looked lost, his eyes wide and haunted. "We need to talk," Arthur bit out, trying to push past me into the house. I didn't move. I stood firm in the doorway. "No. We don't need to do anything. But if you want to talk, you can do it out here, on my porch." His eyes narrowed. "Don't be ridiculous, Lorraine. Let us in. This is my house, Arthur. You are not welcome in it. You have about 3 weeks left before you'll be trespassing if you even set foot on the lawn. Now, what do you want?" Garrett pushed forward. "Mom, this has gone far enough. You're destroying our lives. My car is gone. My credit is ruined. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "about my 50th birthday party. I was thinking about how my eldest son stood up in front of a room full of people and called his mother controlling while he was driving a car I was paying for." Spencer jumped in, his voice cracking. "But to cut us off completely? Dean might get kicked out of college. Is that what you want?" "What I want, Spencer, is for my middle son not to stand up and praise my husband's mistress. As for Dean's college fund, that was money from my parents' inheritance, intended to provide him with an opportunity he clearly doesn't appreciate. He can get a job and apply for student loans, just like millions of other kids do." I looked at Dean, who flinched under my gaze. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Arthur finally lost his composure. He took a step towards me, his finger jabbing the air. "You vindictive witch. This is about the money, isn't it? You were always obsessed with your money." I laughed. A real, genuine laugh that seemed to shock them into silence. "Oh, Arthur. You couldn't be more wrong. This was never about the money. It was about the fact that you all used my money, my home, my life, to build your own comfortable little worlds, and then you decided I was disposable. You thought you could throw me away and keep the perks. You thought you were the kings of this castle. But you made a fatal error." I looked each of them in the eye, one by one. "You forgot who built the castle. You forgot who owned the damn land it stands on. This isn't about money. It's about consequences. A concept none of you have ever had to face before." Well, class is in session. They were speechless. They had come here expecting me to be hysterical, expecting to bully me into submission. They were not prepared for this calm, cold woman standing in the doorway of the house they could no longer enter. They were not prepared for me. They stood on the porch, sputtering, a tangled mess of entitlement and disbelief. Arthur was trying to formulate a threat about lawyers and marital assets. Garrett was talking about family duty. Spencer was muttering about how unfair this all was. It was pathetic. I let them talk for a few minutes, their arguments weak and repetitive. I wanted them to exhaust themselves, to lay all their cards on the table. When they finally wound down, a tense silence fell, broken only by the chirping of birds in the old oak tree on my lawn. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. No one answered. "Good," I said. "Because there's one last piece of business we need to discuss." I turned, walked back into the house, and picked up a thick envelope from the hall table. I came back to the doorway, holding it in my hands. "You're right about one thing, Arthur," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "This is about the future. My future. and by extension, yours. I pulled a sheaf of documents from the envelope. It was a freshly printed and notarized copy of my last will and testament. I spent some time with my lawyer this past week, getting my affairs in order. It's always good to have a plan, don't you think? I've always believed in planning. I held up the first page. This document, I announced, my voice ringing with clarity in the quiet afternoon, is my will. And I've made some changes. Arthur, as my soon-to-be ex-husband who publicly declared his infidelity, you will, of course, be receiving nothing. Not a single dime. Not a photograph. Not a piece of furniture from this house you are being evicted from. His face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. I then turned my gaze to my sons. My 3 boys, who were now staring at the papers in my hand as if they were a death sentence. And Garrett, Spencer, and Dean, I said, and for the first time, my voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the sheer, righteous power of my decision. As you all stood by and supported your father in his deception and cruelty, as you publicly disowned me and my value in your lives, I have honored your position. Your names have been completely and irrevocably removed from this will. You are no longer my beneficiaries. You will inherit nothing. The silence that followed was the most profound silence I have ever heard. It was the sound of 3 futures evaporating into thin air. The trust funds they expected, the property they assumed would be theirs, the safety net they had taken for granted their entire lives, all of it, gone. All of my assets, I concluded, my voice dropping to an almost whisper, my entire inheritance, this house, my investments, everything, will be placed in a charitable trust upon my death. It will be used to fund scholarships and shelters for women and children who have been abandoned by their families. People who actually need and deserve a second chance. They stood there, dead still. The color had drained from all their faces. Arthur looked like he was going to be sick. Garrett's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Spencer was openly gaping, his mouth hanging open in stunned horror. And Dean, tears were silently streaming down Dean's face. They finally understood. This wasn't a temporary punishment. This was a permanent erasure. This was the end. They stood there, frozen. The image is burned into my mind. Arthur, the great tycoon, looking like a deflated balloon. My sons, who I had carried, nurtured, and loved, looking at me as if I were a stranger, a monster who had just stolen their future. But I wasn't a monster. I was simply a woman who had finally learned her own worth. If you're still listening, could you do me a kindness and like this video, and just comment the number 1 down below? It lets me know you wonderful people are still here, and that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support means the world to me, it truly keeps me going. Just comment that number 1 so I can see you. Okay, now let me tell you what happened next. After my announcement, there was no more yelling. There was no more arguing. There was just a thick, dead air hanging over my front porch. It was as if I had sucked all the oxygen out of their world. They just stared, their minds clearly struggling to catch up with the new reality I had just laid out for them. Finally, Arthur found his voice, but it was just a hoarse whisper. You can't do this, Lorraine. I just did, I said softly. The papers are filed. It's done. I looked at them one last time, a tableau of ruin on my doorstep. And I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The heartbreak was a dull, distant ache. All I felt was a profound sense of finality. A sense of peace. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said, my voice even. I have pasta on the stove. I suggest you leave my property. And with that, I stepped back inside. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, firmly. The click of the lock sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of my old life ending. It was the sound of my new life beginning. Through the peephole, I watched them. They didn't move for a full minute. Then, the spell broke. Arthur turned and said something sharp to Garrett, who snapped back at him. Spencer threw his hands up in the air in a gesture of pure despair. They started arguing, their hushed, furious voices filtering through the thick wood of the door. It wasn't my problem anymore. Their chaos was their own. They finally turned and trudged down the walkway, a defeated little army. As they reached the sidewalk, Dean, my youngest, turned back. He looked at my front door, his face streaked with tears. I saw his mouth form the word, Mom, but no sound came out. He lingered for a moment, a lost little boy, before his father barked his name and he hurried to join them. I stayed by the door for a long time after they were gone, my forehead resting against the cool wood. I wasn't crying. I was just breathing. For the first time in 25 years, I felt like I was breathing my own air, in my own house, in my own life. The pasta on the stove had probably burned, but it didn't matter. I could always make more. I could do whatever I wanted. I was finally, terrifyingly, completely free. The months that followed the confrontation were quiet. At first, the silence in the house was deafening. I was so used to the noise of 3 boys growing into men, the sound of Arthur on the phone, the constant hum of a family in motion. Now, there was just me. I had to learn how to be alone again. So, I started filling the silence not with noise, but with life. My life. I took a trip to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do. I spent 2 weeks just by myself, wandering through museums in Florence, eating gelato in Rome, and sitting by the sea on the Amalfi Coast. I didn't have to consult anyone's schedule or worry about anyone's preferences. I just did what I wanted, when I wanted. It was liberating. I came back and threw myself into a small business idea I'd had for years, a boutique landscape design firm. I used the knowledge from my own beloved garden and poured my energy into it. I took classes, got certified, and started small, with friends and neighbors. To my surprise, it took off. I was good at it. People liked my work. For the first time, I was earning my own money, building something that was entirely mine. My salary wasn't huge to start, but it was earned through my own passion and skill, and that felt better than any trust fund. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had called and texted with genuine concern after the party, the ones I had shut out in my grief. I had long lunches with my girlfriends, joined a book club, started taking yoga classes. My life became rich and full in a way it had never been when it was revolving around 4 men. Occasionally, I would hear bits and pieces about them through the grapevine. A friend of a friend mentioned seeing Arthur looking stressed and much older, his new relationship apparently not faring so well without the cushion of my money. Another friend told me that Garrett had to sell his fancy downtown apartment and move into a small rental in the suburbs. Spencer, I heard, was working as a bartender, trying to pay off the debts he'd accumulated. And Dean. I heard Dean had dropped out of college. He couldn't afford the tuition and had refused to take out loans. He was working at a hardware store, living in a cheap room he rented. The news about Dean was the only thing that gave me a pang of something resembling sadness. He was so young. But I had to remind myself that these were the consequences of their own choices. I had given them every advantage, and they had thrown it all away for a moment of cruel loyalty to a man who deserved none. I was rebuilding my world, while they were left to navigate the ruins of the one they had helped to destroy. About a year after what I now privately called the Great Implosion, on a Tuesday afternoon that felt wonderfully, beautifully ordinary, a letter arrived. I'd just come home from a client meeting, my cheeks still flushed with the thrill of landing a major contract to design the rooftop garden for a new downtown hotel. I was humming, feeling the satisfying ache in my muscles from a morning of hands-on work, my mind buzzing with ideas about perennials and irrigation systems. My life had found a new rhythm, one dictated by seasons and soil, by client deadlines and my own creative energy. The chaos of the past felt like a distant, murky dream. I sorted through the mail at my kitchen island, bills for my thriving business, a catalog for rare bulbs, a postcard from a friend vacationing in Maine, and then I saw it. A single, plain white envelope. My name and address were written in a familiar, slightly messy script that made my heart give a painful little squeeze. It was from Dean. My first, visceral instinct was to drop it in the shredder. No questions asked. I had spent a year meticulously rebuilding the fortress around my life, brick by painful brick. My peace was a new and fragile thing, and this letter felt like a stone lobbed over the wall, threatening to shatter the calm. I had heard things, of course. Whispers through the town's still active grapevine. I'd learned to treat these bits of information with a surgeon's detachment, observing them without letting them touch me. Just last month, I'd run into Carol, an old acquaintance, at the farmer's market. After the initial awkward pleasantries, her face softened with a look of genuine pity that was clearly not for me. "Lorraine, you look incredible," she'd said, and I knew it was true. I was healthy, I was smiling, I was standing on my own 2 feet. Then she'd leaned in conspiratorially. "Have you heard about Arthur?" she'd whispered. According to Carol, Arthur's fall from grace had been swift and brutal. His beautiful young mistress, the one he'd paraded on screen at my birthday party, had apparently been in love with his lifestyle, not him. The moment the accounts were frozen and the eviction notice was served, she was gone. Vanished. Arthur, his reputation in the business community shot after his deal fell through so spectacularly, had been unable to secure new investors. He'd been forced to sell his luxury car and was now living in a sad, beige apartment complex out by the highway. He was, Carol said, trying to work as a consultant, a humiliating step down for a man who once saw himself as an emperor of industry. She'd had news of the others, too. Garrett, my son who valued control above all else, had lost it completely. The repossession of the Mustang was just the beginning. The black mark on his credit report made it impossible for him to get a loan or even a decent apartment. He'd lost his prestigious job due to the distraction and was now working in a soul-crushing middle management position for a company he used to mock, his pride swallowed daily. Spencer, the charming socialite, had discovered his charm was directly tied to his wallet. When he could no longer pick up the tab, his fair-weather friends had drifted away. He was working as a bartender, a job that forced him to watch other people live the life he once took for granted, a lonely ghost haunting the edges of the high life. That knowledge had provided a grim, intellectual satisfaction, a sense that the universe had, in its own way, balanced the scales. But this letter, this was different. This was personal. This was a direct communication from one of the architects of my pain. I left it on the kitchen counter and for 3 days, it was a silent, white rectangle of potential agony. Every time I walked past it, I felt a jolt. I was afraid to open it. Afraid of what it might ask of me. Afraid it would be a trick, a new form of manipulation. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning, with a cup of strong coffee in my hand and the sun streaming into my newly redecorated living room, all bright colors and comfortable furniture now, no trace of Arthur's heavy, dark wood taste, I decided I was strong enough. I slit the envelope open. The letter inside was just a single page, written on simple lined paper. "Dear Mom," it began. My breath hitched. He hadn't called me that in what felt like a lifetime. "I don't know if you'll even read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it out. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I swear on my life. I don't want money, and I'm not asking you to change your mind about the will or anything else. You were right to do what you did. We deserved it. I see that now." I had to pause, my eyes blurring. I'd heard apologies before, the hollow, self-serving "I'm sorry you feel that way" kind. This felt different. "I'm writing because I needed to say I'm sorry. What we did to you at your party was the worst thing I have ever been a part of. It was monstrous. I see that now. I stood there and said nothing, and that makes me just as guilty as them. I was a coward, plain and simple. I was so desperate for Dad's approval, so caught up in the idea that he was the cool one, that I helped him break his own wife, my own mother. There is no excuse for it. This last year has been the hardest of my life, but also the most real. I dropped out of school and I'm working at a hardware store. It's not a glamorous life. I assemble grills and stock shelves. But it's the first time I've ever earned my own money, paid my own rent for a tiny room. It's the first time I've ever had to be an adult. And it's made me realize what a spoiled, ungrateful, and fundamentally weak person I was. It's made me realize everything you did for us, everything you gave us, that we just took for granted like the air we breathed. I don't talk to Dad or my brothers anymore. I tried to talk to them about what we did, about feeling sorry, and they don't get it. They're still angry at you. They think you are the villain of the story. They blame you for their problems. I can't be around that poison anymore. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I probably never will. That's a consequence I have to live with. But I just wanted you to know that one of us, at least, understands. One of us is truly, deeply sorry for breaking your heart. Dean. I read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. The tears I thought I no longer had were streaming down my face, dripping onto the cheap, lined paper. They weren't tears of pure sadness or fresh anger. They were tears of a deep, complicated grief, but mingled with a flicker of something else. It was the first crack in the wall of ice I had so carefully constructed around my heart. It was a single, fragile note of genuine remorse in a symphony of selfish, arrogant noise. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a magical fix that made everything okay. But it was something. It was an acknowledgement. And after a year of feeling like my pain had been invisible to them, that was a truly powerful thing. So now, here I am. Back where I started this story, sitting on my porch swing. But everything is different. The swing, once a vessel for my grief, is now my favorite spot to have my morning coffee and watch the sunrise. The air is cool and clean, and the jasmine I planted to replace the old, memory-laden bushes smells sweet and new. My life is my own, and it is a good life. A life built with my own 2 hands. My landscape design business, New Bloom Landscapes, is more successful than I ever dreamed. I have a waiting list of clients. I have a small, dedicated crew. Last week, I stood on the rooftop of the new hotel downtown, looking at the finished garden, my design, my work, with the city skyline stretching out before me, and I felt a sense of pride that was so profound, so purely mine, that it brought tears to my eyes. The paychecks I deposit in the bank, carrying my business name on them, feel more valuable than any dollar I ever inherited. This is a success I have earned. My house has been transformed. It is no longer a monument to a failed marriage. The heavy, dark furniture is gone, replaced with light, airy pieces I picked up myself. The walls are painted in warm, cheerful colors. And the photographs have all been changed. The gallery wall in the hallway no longer shows the forced smiles of a family that was a lie. Now, it holds pictures of me and my girlfriends laughing on a trip to Santa Fe. A picture of my crew and me, covered in dirt and grinning, after finishing a huge project. A stunning photo I took myself of the sunset over the Amalfi Coast. It's a wall of my new life, my chosen family, my joy. My friendships are the bedrock of this new life. Women I had neglected in the haze of my family obligations have rallied around me. We have wine nights in the garden I've meticulously cultivated. We take trips together. We support each other's ventures. They have seen me at my worst and have celebrated my rebirth. They are the sisters I never had, and their love is a constant, steadying presence. And then there is Dean's letter. It sits on my desk, inside a small wooden box. I still haven't answered it. Not because I'm angry, not anymore. But because the question of what to do next is so incredibly complex. For a few days after reading it, I found myself drafting replies in my head. One was cold and distant, acknowledging his apology but offering nothing more. Another was warm, opening the door just a crack. I even went so far as to pull out a piece of my best stationery, the thick, creamy paper I use for special notes, and picked up my favorite fountain pen. I wrote the date at the top of the page, and then I stopped. Because what I realized in that moment of hesitation was the most powerful lesson of the last year. The victory wasn't in cutting them off. The victory wasn't even in my own success. The true victory was in reclaiming my own agency. For 25 years, my life was a series of reactions to the needs and wants of my husband and my sons. Now, for the first time, I am not reacting. I am choosing. The choice of whether or not to contact Dean is mine alone. It is not dictated by guilt, or obligation, or the ghost of the mother I used to be. It will be a choice made by the woman I am now, a woman who is strong, independent, and fiercely protective of her own peace. The mother in me aches for the lost boy in that letter. But the survivor in me knows that my own well-being must come first, always. I look out at my garden. The roses I planted last spring are in full, glorious bloom. They're strong, resilient. They survived the winter frost and the summer beetles, and they came back more beautiful than ever. But they need care. They need pruning. They need to be protected from blight. My peace is like that garden. It is beautiful and it is thriving, but it requires my constant vigilance. My old life is a story that has been told. My old family is a chapter that has been closed. But my future is a vast, unwritten landscape. And for the first time, I am the only one holding the map. I am the only one holding the pen. I get to decide where the path goes next, what seeds to plant, what walls to build. And that is a power greater than any inheritance. That is the ultimate freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to rebuild your own life from the ashes, or if any part of this journey resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. It is a powerful reminder that none of us are alone in these battles. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe, because every single one of us has a story of resilience that is worth telling.